The world was horrified on June 14th of this year when a massive fire ripped through Grenfell Tower. That's a social housing apartment building in London, England, killing nearly 80 people.
Wilson Chowdhry, chairman of an organization that advocates for Pakistani Christians, was nearby when the fire started, and he witnessed its devastation personally. He is here right now. Wilson, come on and join us. What an incredible day. What a horrifying day.
Indeed, it was a nightmare. I remember being there myself and actually seeing people jump from windows to
Where exactly were you, Wilson, when this was happening?
Well, I mean, I was quite close. I live in the east end of London, but I'd been driving up because I run a security company, and we were out on the site. And as soon as I heard about the news, I knew that we had some bottles of water in the back of a car. And we went to, myself and a colleague went to see what assistance we could provide.
Wow. And so you showed up on the scene with these bottles of water. What did you see when you got there?
People crying. There's fire. The fire was blazing. It was quite hot. I mean, at the point that I got in, I got quite close because the police barriers hadn't, at that point in time, been placed in position to prevent traffic coming in. Some of these people were so dishevelled, and they were telling me stories about how elderly people that they knew had been left in the top floor flats, and it's quite bizarre. You would think that people of an elderly nature would have been placed at lower level flats, but obviously that safety question didn't come into place until this fire happened. Some of them spoke about how the fire service asked them to remain inside the building despite the fire blazing. So it was a difficult time for many who were feeling quite grief, a lot of grief at the time.
I know a lot of investigations have been going on, safety issues. Where are things at right now? Because I know there is that whole aspect of, it was a building full of immigrants, poor people. The building wasn't properly maintained, and not only that one, but all throughout London. So what are you hearing now? Is there encouraging signs?
Well, obviously, much of the cladding on some of these buildings has now been taken down, and a move is being going through Parliament to bring in legislation to stop that type of cladding being used in the future. Obviously, this very flammable type, which would match with the laws already in place in places like Europe. And I believe America also has safer laws with regards to cladding. However, obviously, it doesn't take away the fact that people are feeling great animosity towards the government at the moment. I know there's been protest after protest. I remember when Sadiq Khan was there, I was still out there providing aid for at least the first 7 to 8 days, working with local churches, and Sadiq Khan appeared, and mass mobs would be insulting him. Theresa May was actually too frightened, our PM, our Prime Minister.
By the way, he's the Mayor of London.
He's the Mayor of London, sorry, my apologies. But Theresa May herself was too fearful to actually enter into Grenfell because the hatred for politicians at that point was at its peak. A lot of people were blaming the cladding on the fact that the council, because these buildings were for immigrants and for the lower, for those on the bottom end of a social ladder, for want of a better word. However, I mean, this cladding is fairly ubiquitous. I think more to the point, the real concerns were the lack of sprinklers in a tower block. It said that if sprinklers had been in place, much of that fire wouldn't have spread in the fashion that it had.
It's so heartbreaking. I think how amazing it was that you, as a follower of Jesus, was right there, able to bring help, and of course working with churches, seeing them step out. Where are you seeing people of faith respond in the midst of all of this controversy and pain?
The day after the incident, the whole of Britain, it seemed, had arrived at Grenfell. I can't tell you how many thousands of people were there. If you'd walked along the streets, there's a particular street called Portobello Road. There was food, there was clothing, there were bags of gifts for children, for all types of gifts for people, just to help these newly homeless people. We didn't see any of the victims, because the victims, of course, had been taken into safe shelter by then. And this obviously caused concern about how many people had actually died. And initial figures were fudged by the police, much because they don't actually give out correct figures until they know they can prove exactly how many people have died. And estimates now are over 80 died. But churches were massively involved and still are today. Whereas many of the other establishments have stopped, churches still provide food, assistance, counselling. One church in particular that I was working with, St. John's, has spoken about the extreme trauma that people are going through, and many of them have come to Christ because they found the love that the Christian church in the area has offered them.
You talk about trauma. I mean, you got all these terrorist attacks. You had the Grenfell Tower Fire. I mean, what is that doing to people in London and in England as a country? I mean, it just seems it's one thing after the next.
Yeah, community tension has definitely worsened since Grenfell Tower, and if we're talking about the London bomb attacks and obviously Manchester bomb attack, that's actually caused a lot of polarisation too. Fortunately, I believe that we are a stoic community, and what I have noticed is that although there were beliefs that there would be a huge upsurge in attacks on Muslims in the community, it isn't as bad as people would probably believe because of the one incident where a man was killed outside Finsbury Park Mosque. In most communities, I mean, we held an interfaith harmony meeting on our town hall steps, and we were joined by Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, several imams, and we held up placards that simply said "Stronger Together," making people realise that, whatever happens, God created all of mankind, and we are all equal. Not that we'll, obviously, as a Christian, there are certain things that I believe about entry into heaven, but we are created equal, and we do have to have love for one another. The Bible tells us quite simply, love the Lord thy God and love thy neighbour as you would love thyself.
Wilson, thank you so much for the update, and we'll have you back. You're in a very interesting part of the world, and Cheryl, it's also interesting too is when these calamities happen, it's often when the church community pulls together and they're just irrelevant, the church, whatever, but that's when we see faith really coming into action.
No, that's why I love the church being the church. Thank you for being part of that, Wilson. Thank you for joining us today. It's been great to have you.
Thank you so much.